morning, Wabash. Our speaker today earned his BA in Religious Studies from the University of Vermont, then went to earn his BA in History from University of California, Santa Cruz. He also earned his MA and PhD from the same place. He was granted, he came to Wabash as a visiting professor in 1999, never left, was granted tenure at the end of last year, and is currently acting Associate Dean of Students. A little known fact, though, is that actually Dean Warner worked as a chef for a decade before entering teaching. So please welcome our speaker today, Dean Warner, for Time to Make Soup.
Thank you, and thanks for braving the cold and the ice to come out here. Last night when I was on my way over to College Hall to bang a few heads together, I slipped and fell on the ice, and my first thought was, I wonder if I could sue the college, and then I realized, wait a minute, you are the college. So yeah, I just took that idea out. I'd like to thank the Sphinx Club, especially Elliot Allen and Kyle Hayes, for the invitation to address the community on this stage yet again. But today I'd like to talk about the difficult economic times that we're experiencing as a nation and as a college, and hope that we can all think a little clearer about how to address the specific challenges that confront us. If these words serve as an encouragement to further reflection on these matters, I'll be pleased, especially if you're moved to visit me in weekly office hours or in other venues for further discussion. I'll be uncharacteristically brief because, as a wise preacher once told me, no souls are saved after the first 20 minutes. Everyone has a different reaction to stressful situations in life. Some people find solace in the bottle. Some work it off in the Allen Center, while still others consume copious quantities of junk food. I myself will admit to participating in two of these strategies in the past. These days, however, when feeling stressed, I turn to another answer. I make soup. After a tough day of denying student housing requests or irritating senior staff in meetings, I need to wind down. There's nothing quite like whipping up a pot of chicken and garlic soup to ease the tension. As the Campbell's commercial says, soup is good food. Well, Campbell's soup is good food if you're looking for 2,000 milligrams of sodium and hardly any protein. But basically, soup usually is good food. It can be made with wholesome ingredients, however you choose to define this. But more importantly, the soup is usually made with a certain positive spirit. Soup is made to share. When paired with good bread, soup is a simple, hearty meal that can be offered freely to others. Soup is not pretentious. I made a lot of pretentious food when I was a chef in California, so I've been making soup for a long time. I began in earnest my first restaurant job back in 1973 at a place called the Fresh Ground Coffee House in Burlington, Vermont. Moondance Cafe in town here reminds me of that place. In 1973, you could order what we called a beggar's banquet at the Fresh Ground, which included a bowl of homemade soup, a slice of whole wheat bread with butter, a slice of Vermont Cabot cheddar cheese, a cup of coffee, made from freshly ground beans, of course, hence the name Fresh Ground. All this was yours for 99 cents plus tax. I still use many of the same soup recipes I learned there. In fact, some of you may have eaten these soups at the Social Science Colloquia in Baxter Hall. Well, not the same soups, but soups made from the same recipes. Soup is not as cheap as it was in 1973, but it still qualifies as wholesome and inexpensive food. I found myself making more of it lately because of another stressor, the increasingly dismal economic situation. My own plight is not so bad, though I did lose thousands of dollars from my retirement fund last year. Easy come, easy go. But others are not so lucky. Hundreds of people in this county have lost their jobs recently due to factory closures and downsizing. Some of your own families may have already suffered this fate. If so, my prayers are with you. Economists universally agree that the situation for working people will get worse before it gets better, as unemployment will push the unheard of mark of 10%, perhaps. Many who are lucky to hold on to jobs will have their hours or benefits trimmed, while others will watch the real value of their frozen wages diminish. Our politicians are struggling with the answer to all of this, resolving to pump major funds into declining sectors of the economy with unprecedented bailouts of the banking and auto industries. No one knows how this trillion-dollar gamble will work out. But even if it works, we'll be facing the implications of this deficit spending for years. So what do? I make soup. Well, and I hug my wife, my kids, my dogs, and maybe even the odd student I run into. That's what making soup reminds me to do. This isn't the first time that our nation has faced this sort of crisis. Most people my age feel that the situation has become as dire as we can remember. However, most people in this room, staff and faculty and students alike, did not directly experience the last major economic collapse, the Great Depression of the 1930s. Now, it would be alarmist to draw a direct parallel just yet, but this has been the closest we have come to that historical moment since those fateful days, I think. As an historian, of course, I believe that we can learn from the past. So I invite you to seek out people who have experienced the Depression to hear their stories. I've heard a few of these tales retold recently, and I've investigated some specifically Wabash stories that I'd like to pass along. A few days ago on NPR, I heard a woman speaking about her father's memory of the Depression. He always felt that his family fared better than others because they decided to put in a large garden and a chicken coop in their backyard. I've been working on this myself recently, having cleared a substantial piece out back, and I hope to be sharing my produce later this summer. It's a return to a simpler way of life, depending on local foods and your own abilities to provide for your family. Now, you'll be happy to know that I consider all of you part of my family, so you hopefully have an opportunity to share in the harvest. It's an opportunity to return to rational and humane practices with our environment, as suggested by our speaker, Joel Salatin, who visited us last week. More than that, it's a realization that, as noted by Barbara Kingsolver, we should not expect to eat asparagus 52 weeks out of the year. Because we've come to enjoy eating foods flown in from afar, not on an occasional basis, but on a regular basis, our diets have become increasingly unlocal. My parents told stories of growing up in the Depression, how they never threw anything out that might prove useful, never replaced anything until it was truly worn out. Everyone learned how to fix machines. Even my grandmother, whose skills lay more in the culinary area, learned how to fix stuff. My mother was especially poor, growing up in Kansas City, Kansas, without indoor plumbing and limited electrical service. She also claimed to walk 5 miles to school each day, uphill both ways. But history does have a way of changing over time. No matter how bad their circumstances, however, my grandmothers always set a good table, and no one was turned away. Much of the time, the menu featured, you guessed it, soup. There's something about sharing a bowl of soup on a cold day like this, even if you need to put on an extra sweater and to be able to turn down the heat. Wabash College dealt with the Great Depression as well. I spent the morning yesterday poring over Depression-era issues of The Bachelor, which I recommend you do sometime while you're here. It's just an awful lot of fun to do this. You'll see how similar Wabash was in a lot of ways through the years. So I looked at The Bachelor and what was then Wabash Magazine, researching for evidence on how the college responded to the economic crisis of the 30s. What I found was that despite some concerns on the part of the president and the board of trustees at the time that fundraising had become nearly impossible, the college managed as best it could to run as business as usual. The Bachelor in particular was filled with news stories about sporting triumphs and fraternity events. The Pan-Hell Dance of 1932 was canceled by Dean Kendall, not because of economics, but due to the fact that the Caveman publication was in charge of the event, and as the paper cryptically opined, nothing good can come of anything run by the Caveman. Like I say, business as usual. Statistics published in these fleeting years, the history which I hope you've all seen of the first 150 years of Wabash, demonstrate that enrollment remained steady through the Depression. Crawfordsville residents endeavored to find part-time jobs for needy students, and the college stretched its resources to alleviate student economic problems whenever possible. In 1935, the NYA, or National Youth Administration, one of a handful of New Deal programs, all of which seem to have alphabetical names, began providing employment opportunities for students. This was before the days of Spark Center, don't cheer, so that students established the Student Commissary, first located in Forest Hall, if you can imagine, which fed them for an average of 14 cents per meal. All in all, the impression from the historical record is that Wabash men found ways to keep their spirits up, even while everyone was struggling economically, and they came together as a community to face these challenges. The fact that very little was written about the suffering indicates to me that Wabash guys did not spend as much time complaining about their circumstances as they did finding creative ways to address them. Now I'd like to shift gears for a few moments and do what older people like to do so much, which is to offer a little advice. Take it or leave it. Mostly I'd like to make some suggestions about how we should react as a nation and as a college to the challenges that we currently face. Not so much to convince you of the value of these ideas, which I discovered long ago is impossible here anyway, but so much more so to encourage you to think critically about how you might solve these problems and how you can lead effectively in your specific corner of the world. On one level, the history of our nation is defined by conflict with other countries and within our own borders. Some of our behavior in the past is embarrassing by the standards of our day, both in terms of how we sparred with other peoples and how some of our own people have been exploited or held back. Yet seen from another angle, our history has been a series of remarkable struggles to bring freedom to the world and to challenge the immoral, racist, and sexist practices of our own making. So we are in sum a nation of fighters. We can be inspired by the examples of Fannie Lou Hamer and Cesar Chavez, even as they struggled to correct seemingly intractable moral contradictions of our national fabric. We're wildly individualistic, for better or worse, and we have demonstrated a resilience in the face of insurmountable odds. We are fighters. And as a nation, we are sitting on the hinge of history. Since 1980, we have taken conspicuous consumption to a fever pitch. We have forgotten the lessons of our grandparents from the dark days of the Depression. In our rush to surround ourselves with gadgets, labor-saving devices, and anything that will take us away from the specter of silence, we are battling with our own humanity. Many of us can't imagine driving without using a cell phone, or sitting through a class without surreptitiously checking email, or actually, dare I say it, sitting down to read a book that was not assigned in our class. Call me grumpy, but I think we've lost our way. And I don't know if this has caused the economic crisis, but I do know that living more simply is part of the solution. Like I say, we need to make more soup. But I feel positive. I'm bullish on the future because we are a nation of fighters. We need to pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off, in the words of our new president. We need to brace ourselves for difficult times, not against one another, but as a community, against a common foe. In my own life, this means doing more service work, which I'm embarrassed to say has been lacking in my last 52 years. A group of us are going to New Orleans, led by Professor Bear, over spring break to help dig out the community from Hurricane Katrina. And I invite you to enjoy us if you'd like. It's a good year not to spend money on spring break. Many of you have helped with the Habitat of Humanity projects also on the west side of campus and other public service work that you do. A few more socially concerned faculty members like myself would do well to ask themselves what they are doing for their community. Because I've been very inspired, to be honest with you, about what the students have done in my time here in terms of service work. Like I say, this has come late in my life too. Trying to roll up our sleeves. That's how our country made it through the Depression. It was not just due to the progressive government programs known as the New Deal, though we'd do well to study that response. Individuals made a bigger difference, cutting back on consumption, sharing when possible, readjusting to what passes for a need. The emergence from the Depression was a triumph of the human spirit, one that deserves further study by critical thinkers. But about Wabash College. Surely our college history has also been a story of many struggles as well as many victories. The most basic of these is experienced by all of you in your freshman year, no? The first semester here is inevitably a humbling experience. You may enter here with a high opinion of yourself, but quickly you discover you're just one of many. We are all down in the mud together and do not appreciate the elitist airs that are found in many liberal arts colleges. Leave your leather jacket at home. This incredible Wabash spirit is the face of adversity, and is the stuff of legend. In the present moment, we must all dig in deeper to take advantage of this special energy that we have. Here are a few thoughts about how we might proceed. I hope you can think of others and share them in the community. First, you need to educate yourselves about the situation. Our endowment has dropped from $380 million to $230 million in a little over a year. And we're not unusual in this. Harvard's lost $4 billion, so. Of course, they had more to start with. This matters because we're an endowment-driven institution. Simply put, the money we spend to support our students is greater than in other schools, which depend more heavily on tuition. When the market suffers and we experience consecutive quarters in which the endowment falters, this has a negative impact on what we can spend on financial aid and on everything else. The projections for next fiscal year are sobering, but the 2 years that follow are truly eye-opening. We are not alone in this predicament, of course. Yet, for most people in our community, speak for staff and faculty anyway, this is the first time that we've been faced with a serious need to make cuts. The sober truth is that we need to simplify our lives here, finding ways to cut. We need to make soup. I can tell you from the corridors of Central Hall that the administration is absolutely committed to responding to the current situation without causing any undue suffering on the part of students or anyone else for that matter. It's what we're thinking a lot about. This is not the time to overreact, but it's the time to think critically. Yet some of these cuts will in fact affect us. For example, we'll not be hiring to replace all sabbatical leaves, including my own, meaning that the faculty will need to make adjustments in the course of teaching. We're studying ways to conserve energy on campus, which is of course a good idea even in the best of times. And most recently, off-campus studies was cut by 25%. Hopefully students can find alternative international experiences such as immersion trips. What specifically can we do to help out? First of all, we all need to examine our expectations of the college. In my own life, I'm trying to invert this question to, what can I do for the college? Not the other way around. Like many faculty members, I've come to believe that I can spend money on anything that's a good idea. Time to reroute that thinking for all of us. My suggestion to staff and faculty colleagues in particular is that we need to view the situation from the perspective of the whole college, rather than steadfastly defend our own budgets. The skill of thinking collectively is imperative in our day, and it doesn't come simply. Staff and faculty should be examining our expectations from a collectivist perspective. Secondly, what can we do to improve our competitive edge? As you know from reading the papers, the competition between colleges will be growing even fiercer. We all know that Wabash needs to exert great effort to attract quality students, since the rest of the world does not completely understand us right away. I'm sure most of you went through a long process before deciding to come to school here. What can we, that is, what can you do to help continue to attract quality students? One answer is to redouble our efforts at putting ourselves across personally. A few years ago, our place kicker, Olmi Olmsted, admitted right here from this stage in senior chapel that he had not thought seriously about coming to Wabash when he was in high school until he found a short note in his mailbox from Professor Blix, whom he had met on a visit here. This note card kept him from kicking against us in the bell game for 4 years. We all have our version of making that personal connection. We do it all the time. We need to do it still more. There are many other ways that you can think of, individually or in your living units, that we can help make a stronger Wabash, given the shrinking resources that everybody in the country has. I encourage you to engage in these conversations out of love for this exceptional college. So my purpose here is not to sound alarmist, but to bring students into the conversation about how we can react to economic challenges that lay ahead. I hope we can face this challenge the way we have greeted so many others, together as a community. Wabash has a great tradition of facing difficult challenges in the classroom, on the playing field, and in the larger community. This is, of course, the true meaning of Wabash always fights. So let's work together to deal with these problems. We're one team. We are Wabash College. And while we're at it, let's make some soup. Thank you.